Awesome. So we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Hope you're all doing well and safe and healthy in your respective homes. My name is Bunmi Emenanjo. If you don't know me, I am the founder and CEO of Atlas Book Club, a book subscription box company for international diverse children's books. And I'll let Mindy introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here with you today. My name is Mindy Galati. I am the CEO and founder of Fundamental Advisory. We are a consulting firm focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm a mom of 2 kids, 6 and 8, and I'm excited to be here and have this conversation with you today.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to have this conversation because we met on in a group of lawyer moms, and we connected and we've met in person. Actually, was that 2 years ago when you came to DC? Yeah. So we met them, but over the course of the years, we just connected because we have a shared interest and shared mission. And let me tell a little bit about Atlas Book Club. It is a book subscription box company focused on globally diverse children's books. And so just to give you a little bit of background of how this company came about, I'm an attorney by training, but like I said, I have 3 kids, and I wanted the kids to be connected, remain connected with their African heritage. I'm Nigerian American. Was born here in the States, grew up in Nigeria. And because of that purpose, I started Atlas Book Club. And what we did was we would select different books that feature different African countries. That's how we started. And I wanted the kids to just continue to grow their African knowledge, their knowledge about, their African culture, and remain connected to their sense of self. But then that grew into an exploration of other countries and other cultures around the world. And I just saw how it really resonated with them and with their friends who weren't African or didn't have any, African ancestry. And it really resonated with them. And it just highlighted the importance of diversity in children's literature. Children should be able to see themselves in the books that they read. They should be able to see themselves represented, but they should also see other cultures represented. The books should serve not only as mirrors, but as windows out into the world. And of course, when I started Atlas Book Club, Mindy knew about it, and it just made sense for us to have that collaboration. And I'll let you talk about your background and how we decided to come together.
Yeah, and we met on Facebook, and we met in real life. So we're those Facebook real life friends. And we were actually supposed to give our first live workshop in Austin 2 days ago, prior to coronavirus. We had booked a beautiful space, and we were going to be having a community conversation about creating a culturally competent and diverse children's library. And so here we are. We have adapted like everybody else has. But this is something near and dear to my heart as well. I was an attorney, a criminal defense attorney, and then I had a son and a daughter close in time. And we are a multi-ethnic family. My husband is Persian and Indian. His parents are Muslim and Hindu. I am a white woman from Utah, from a non-religious family. So we have a whole bunch of cultural dynamics and a richness of different views on the world. And we've been different places, and we see the world in so many different places. And so when my kids were born, I wanted them to not experience just a kind of a white version of children's books. And so I just took it upon myself 8 years ago to start really cultivating a very culturally rich library for them. I wanted them to see Indian characters in their books, Persian characters in their books. I wanted them to see mixed race families, mixed ethnicity families talk about religion. And so it was just a personal mission. And then 4 years ago, I started my diversity and inclusion consulting firm. And very quickly, I realized that a lot of the CEOs and executives that I was coaching and counseling about diversity, equity, inclusion, had they just had some children's books and just raised in a way that they saw, which you just said, which was a window to the world, they wouldn't need me. I want to put myself out of work with this. I want to put myself out of business. And the way that we do that is to have kids grow up culturally competent and also have a sense of themselves in literature and not always see something different. And this is whether it be gender, race, religion, ethnicity, language, ability. We really need as parents to confront this issue. And so this is a passion project for me. And I have the best partner to go on this passion project with. So.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that we're doing this, because you and I have had numerous conversations, not on Facebook, about this very topic. And what you just said, I will give you a real life example of what you just said about if some of these executives had been exposed to diverse children's literature, and not just literature, like arts and culture. If they had that exposure at a young age, then we won't have this crisis, which is what it is, that we have right now in the workplace. So the example I'm going to give, when my daughter was in second grade, she's in fifth grade now, she, well, let me go back a little bit. We moved to this neighborhood. It's a fantastic neighborhood. My neighbors are great and we absolutely love it. But the school's not very diverse, right? And at one point, my son was the only Black boy in his class. So we moved into this neighborhood. My daughter was in second grade, and my mission was like, anywhere I go, I am bringing the diversity with me, so I go into their classes and I read, parents get invited to be a guest reader. And when I go, I take a book from our library, right? And I go and I take it with me and read to the kids. So I was reading to the second grade class, and I was reading this book, actually, The Water Princess, which was set in Burkina Faso. And as I was reading it, this little girl raises her hand and says, excuse me, I have a question about that book. And I asked her, oh, what's your question? She was like, I think that book is racist. And I said, wow, why do you say that? Why do you think that? And she said, because there are no white people in that book, right? Mm-hmm. And so it really hit me like, wow, the idea that there are countries in different parts of the world where there are no white people and brown people are a majority was so foreign to this little girl, and hopefully, as she grows up, she has some exposure to different cultures, but that's how it happens. We have to catch these kids at the age where they're most impressionable and expose them through literature or arts, culture in their community to different cultures, so that they grow up being more open-minded, accepting, and not just accepting, but embrace and celebrate cultures that are different from their own.
Yeah, and what I think is important, not to that point, I'm a white mother raising non-white children. And so I feel like I have a really serious duty to ensure that they don't see the world from the white point of view. And I have been very intentional my entire parenthood journey. And I had a friend one time tell me, don't just raise your kids to understand cultures, raise them to really like embrace other cultures, like just not understand, embrace. Exactly. And enjoy and appreciate and maybe bring some of that culture into their life. And, the example that I'll give is that I have been very intentional about having books where there's only Black or people of color in our family. And my daughter, who is 6 now, she has a whole bunch of books on ballerinas, and every single one of them has a Black ballerina. Mm-hmm. And I did that purpose. I brought a couple to show, and I have like 6 or 7 of them, because I want her to think of that when she sees a ballerina, because everything in her life right now, set up in the United States, we're situated in Austin, Texas, is to see whiteness. And I have to counter that, because they also have a white mother who they love, and I am their person that they go to for all their needs. And I think it's important for us to counter, like what this little girl said, that your experience is not everybody else's. And that, just because you see a book where there's all Black characters in it, that is the experience of a large majority of the world. And these messages, when we read these books to our kids, just like this, people get nervous when little kids ask questions like that. Yeah. But that is what is needed. And that's what's lacking, is that in my work, when I go into a company to do strategic planning around DEI or do workshops, people are very nervous to talk about race and difference because they're so scared. But you don't need to be scared of it. You just need to embrace like where you are, and wherever you
Yeah.
are, you can learn. But if we teach kids when they're very little about these things, it sets their curiosity off. As
Boom.
grown-ups, we don't have enough curiosity. So
Yeah.
we just
Yeah.
aren't as curious.
Yeah.
Kids want to know everything. And so if you
Yes.
introduce everything, and you introduce a global perspective, which is what you do with your company, if you introduce that global perspective, they see themselves as part of the world instead of so, I think, self-focused. And I actually think that's a big problem in our country too, is a very self-centered or self-focused, there's a lot of people who fall into that category. And so I think with children's books, and it's not just literature, it's picture books, it's when they're babies,
Yeah.
representation
Yeah.
of toys and movies, and the beauty of this is that we are at a place with the media right now that we can really cultivate what they watch on TV like never before. When I grew up, everybody watched the same American TV shows with all the same stereotypes. But now as a parent, you have a choice. You can look through Netflix, you can read the reviews, you can make sure that you're finding the most diverse cast, and that the subject matter is situated in a way that you want. I mean, I've had my son say to me before, why are all the shows that we see, there's always a boy and a girl who love each other? Why aren't there any two boys or two girls? I don't get it. And so those, in that misrepresentation that really happens a lot with gender norms and stereotypes, it can open up conversations if you've given your kids the tools to start seeing and understanding, some of the inequities or the advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about curiosity, because I say all the time, and in some of my posts and my blog posts, is what we're trying to do, right, is not just talk about diverse cultures. Yes, that's a first step, but we want to showcase and highlight diversity within cultures. The world is so rich, and there's so many rich cultures out there. I mean, you talk about Nigerian culture, even within Nigerian culture, there's so much diversity within the culture. And when relating that to curiosities, it's impossible to expose our kids to all the cultures around the world. That's just not possible. But instilling in them that curiosity, that sense of curiosity. So when they're older and they walk into a room and they see a man or woman that presents her as being, from South Asian culture, they just don't automatically, oh, this person is India. Well, you don't know. They may be Indian, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Like, just because somebody looks a certain way, that doesn't just automatically pinpoint where they're from. But how do we do that? By exposing them at such a young age so that they recognize that there is such rich diversity within cultures. And so they walk into these rooms and they have, that sensitivity to be able to engage conversation in a manner that's not offensive, in a manner that not only offensive, because that's a low bar, right? But in a manner that's informed, they walk into those conversations like that. So I totally agree with you on that. And I'm so excited that we're having this conversation, because I think this is the first of many such conversations. And I also wanted to add one more thing, actually, talking about diversity within cultures. Another quote that I quote very often, Chimamanda Adichie is a Nigerian author, and she has a TED Talk, which I encourage everyone to watch. It's a TED Talk, and it's called The Danger of a Single Story. And what she says in that TED Talk, in a nutshell, is that stereotypes are not necessarily untrue. That's not the problem with stereotypes. The problem with stereotypes is that they paint a picture that says that is the only story. They paint the picture of a single story, whereas there are so many other stories within cultures that are so enriching. So, for example, how to apply that if you're putting together a children's library, right, is if you want a book from South Africa, for example. When you think about South Africa, people are thinking Nelson Mandela, you're thinking of, the history of apartheid. Those are the things that immediately comes to one's mind when they think about South Africa. And those are important stories. Yes, absolutely, those stories need to be told. But there are so many stories within the country of South Africa. So select a book that showcases a South African boy or girl just being a regular kid, going on an adventure, getting into mischief, being a good neighbor, you know. So that's what I really want to encourage people to be thinking about when they're putting together their children's library. And we can go into more detail about that.
Yeah, and I want to follow up with that, because you and I had this conversation recently, which is that, you know, when it's not just about, like, stereotypes may be true for certain people, but it's also what we have both talked about is that building this diverse and rich library and children's literature around your kids gives them a sense of belonging. And in my work, I find a lot of my clients bring me in to do talks on imposter syndrome, belonging, unconscious bias, and these things. And I'll tell you that really, if you don't ever see yourself reflected in stories, and it's not just stories of oppression. So I'll go to South Africa for an example. If you're South African and you come to the United States and you're working at a company, and the only thing people know about South Africa is the oppression story, they don't know you, and they tie that to you, and that's not who you are. And I'm always fearful of othering people or making or telling their, you know, the oppressive story that is at their root. Like, I want to show the beauty of that person, not just that one snippet. And that goes along with belonging, because, and I'll give you an example of my husband. You know, he's Indian and Persian. His dad's from India, his mom's from Iran. And he goes through life not knowing where he fits, because he's not truly embraced like a lot of his Indian friends. He's like, I'm not like them in all the same ways, because my mom was not Indian, and so I was raised in with a different cultural set of you know, even the way they eat and even the way that they have parties, for example. But he's also not totally Persian. He doesn't look Persian. He's dark skinned, Indian looking man. And so the belonging factor for kids, like, had he seen books where he was reflected, would have been really important. And, you know, one of the books that I bought for my kids, because they are, you know, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious family, I bought this book, and I'll just show it, and we can provide lists after, but this book is called Marisol, McDonald Does Not Match. It's written in both Spanish and English, and it's about a little girl who has a Scottish redheaded dad and a Peruvian mom, and she feels sometimes like she doesn't match. And I bought this for my kids when they were infants, because I wanted to read this to them to understand that they do, you know, they are from different cultures, and their skin color is different, and their religion is different. But there's a lot of other people like them. They do belong. They have a place in the world. And that's what we can do when we seek out these books. And one thing I want to say is that it's not easy to find these kinds of books. And that's a problem, because this is not something that I just walked into a bookstore and I was like, oh, pick this up off the shelf. I had to Google and research, and it's not that hard. So that's the other thing I want to say, is that some people are like, oh, I just don't know what to buy. Well, Google's your friend. Atlas Book Club is your friend. They have an amazing blog where they have a bunch of books. But you can do it. But the other thing is, I want to encourage bookstores and schools to really dig in, because, you know, this diversity is beautiful. And in 20, 30 years, we're going to see the results. And every time I talk to a group about unconscious bias, or every time I give a speech on creating inclusive cultures, I wish they were kids, because it would be so much better if they were kids and they didn't have to relearn everything. And so I wanted to talk a little about belonging, because I think that's important in this conversation as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we talked about that a little bit. And we also talked about the imposter syndrome part of it, right? You know, because again, it's important for kids to see themselves represented, not just in books, but in different careers, and which is why President Obama was so like, right? It's important you know, so it's so important for them to see themselves represented from the time that they're kids, so that when they grow up and they're in these rooms where, they're the only brown person, or the only Asian person or whatever, they're not sitting there feeling like, oh, do I even belong here? Because if you've seen yourself represented in different stories and in different roles, then you feel like you belong. Absolutely. And I also want to add to that. Books, yes, should absolutely serve as mirrors where you see yourselves mirrors where you see yourselves represented. But they should also serve as windows where you see, you can look out into the world. But what the quote also says is, books should serve as sliding doors where you kind of dip in and out, right? And I believe the author of the quote is Rudin Sims Bishop, who's this amazing African American professor. And the quote just fits so perfectly, because at the end of the day, we are actually more similar than we are different. We can connect. I, as a Nigerian woman, connect with you, because we have shared interests. So if a book is doing its job and is being representative, but also showcasing different cultures, a teenager in Brooklyn can relate to a teenager in, I don't know, India, because they have somewhat similar life experiences to an extent. So I wanted to show this book I talked to you about earlier. So Mira's Curly Hair. I absolutely love this book because it talks about this little girl and how sometimes she wishes her hair was straight and all these, things that she thinks about around her hair, but guess what? This book is set in Dubai. That's what hit me so much about this book. I absolutely love it. It's set in Dubai, but a little girl, in Baltimore, for example, or Louisiana, can pick up that book and see these beautiful images of this beautiful brown girl with this beautiful afro who lives in Dubai, and then connect with that character in the book. So there's a lot of work to be done. Absolutely. Bookstores, and there's so many independent publishers doing this work. There's so many independent publishers doing this type of work. But again, demand will drive it. We have to be out there buying the books, asking for it, going in stores. If it's Native American Month, and I'll save that story for another day. If it's Native American Heritage Month, November, and you go into a bookstore and don't have a Native American heritage display with books, you should probably ask for it. And they want to make money too. There's different, bookstores and companies, they want to make money. So we have to drive the demand. So, look at the time. Look at the time.
I know.
You and I talked, like, we could talk about this for hours. Let's see if there are any questions coming in. So if you have any questions, please drop it in the comments and we will answer them. What's the name of the Dubai book you showed? It's Mira's Curly Hair, Mira. I don't know how you say that. Mira's Curly Hair. And we'll put a list together of the books that we showed here. Yeah. And post that.
And really what's interesting and what...
so we don't have any other questions right now, but I wanted to ask you, so how does your experience as a criminal prosecutor inform the type of work that you do now?
Yeah, so I was actually a criminal defense attorney, so I was on the other side.
Okay.
But us defense attorneys are proud. So what it informed me in my work is that I spent a lot of time in trial and I watched how bias really makes decisions for us. And that's where I got my subject matter expertise to teach on implicit bias. But what I learned there kind of related to our conversation is that I walked in as a young 26-year-old attorney, white woman, walking into the criminal justice system in Southern California. And, all the stereotypes start firing off for everybody involved. And what I found is that a lot of those stereotypes are very untrue and very unfounded. And this is where, if you're raised in a household and raised in a family that allows curiosity and allows you to question things, it's much easier when you're confronted with difficult situations and dealing with your biases and dealing with understanding people. I feel like being a criminal defense attorney for almost 10 years made me an incredibly a better person. It made me understand decisions, good and bad. It made me see, you know, the stark disparities within race, within socioeconomic advantages, disadvantages. I was a private attorney for a while. And so I got to see the clients who could pay versus the clients who could not pay. And relating it to kids, because I had kids after this, after I was my time as a criminal defense attorney. And when I had kids, I knew I wanted them to understand the complexity of people, because I loved my clients. I loved every one of my clients. I felt like I owed them my best self and my best lawyer skills, but they were complicated. And some of them did very terrible things. And they were still humans who had feelings, who had families, who had moms who would come to court and cry for them. And I talk to my kids about that. And I buy books about criminal justice system and about, you know, what is crime, and that all, you know, criminals are not bad. There's no bad people. There's only people who make bad decisions. And that is the complexity of humans that we have to give to our kids through books and experiences and conversation. And also, I'll tell you this, if you're uncomfortable as a parent talking about race, which a lot of people are.
Yeah.
Children's books can give you the language to start talking about it. They can teach you as much as they're going to teach your kid. You know, I mean, read them for yourself and start to see what happens inside of you. And you can get some, you'll learn alongside your kids, which is actually a really beautiful process to go through.
Yeah. And I mean, the most intimate thing you can do as a parent is to read a bedtime story to your child. I mean, very few things are more intimate than that as a parent. So when you do that and you make the choice to select a book that has diverse characters, that's so powerful, right? Because kids, they put value on what you put value on. You know, that's what they see as valuable. And if what you put your time, your resources, whether it's your money or your energy, what you direct that to is what kids would identify and recognize as valuable. So just the fact that you can sit there at bedtime and read a book that has so many diverse characters and such rich stories, you know, that is really, really powerful. I mean, research has shown that kids are most impressionable, you know, between the ages of 2 and 5. And the way I see it, you should be exposing your kids to diverse cultures, and those values should be as early as teaching your kids how to say please and thank you. You know, if that's how you're raising your kids and putting those values, that should be an integral part of it, such that it's the norm. You know, it's the norm to be surrounded by diverse characters. Hopefully that's, you know, that's where we end up, because not only are you going to end up raising kids who are kind and empathetic and compassionate, but they'll be more prepared to enter the workforce when they're older. You know, I mean, statistics have shown that in a couple of decades, the combination of the minority groups is going to become the majority. And this is an increasingly global economy that we're living in. So our kids are going to be interacting with people from different parts of the world by the time they're adults in the workplace. So how do we prepare them for that? We do that by exposing them now to these kinds of books. And of course, Atlas Book Club is all about books, and I want you to buy a box, of course. But it's not just books, it's art. It's, you know, what's going on in your community. And if you don't have anything going on in your community, Google and look for a neighboring community where they have different cultures being showcased, you know, and once that becomes just, this is what our family does, it just becomes a norm, and it's an integrate part of your family DNA. So.
Yeah, and I will say kind of in conclusion, you know, we're going to continue to do these talks. Yeah. We have a lot of great information to share, and we want to build a community around this. This is a passion project for me. I've been doing it since my kids were born. And the companies that I consult for and the workshops that I do, I always give reading lists, but I've been giving reading lists for kids' books too, because I'm hoping the parents in the room start this ahead of time, because I want the future leaders in 20 or 30 years from now to not need cultural competency training. I do cultural competency training. I do this work for people who have never explored and looked out that window. But I want to really push that if we do it with our kids now, they will be more innovative, more expressive, more curious, and really the world can take a pivot into being much more open and honest. And that's a lot of the dialogue we need to have. And so we're going to be continuing to have these conversations. We have a date for our next one, correct?
Yes, I wrote it down. June 11th at 4 p.m. Let's see, we have a couple of questions that popped up. So let's see.
Yeah, I can go a little longer.
I can too. Okay. What was the name of the book that Mindy held up?
This one's called Marisol, McDonald Does Not Match. And it is in Spanish and English, which I love.
I love that too. I mean, we featured one book in the Atlas Book Club box a couple of months ago, and it was bilingual, and I got so much great feedback from that. So I love when they have the two languages. Let's see, here's another one. We have many amazing books for younger kids, but now that my older is in middle school, we're struggling to find good reads on these issues. What are some books that you recommend for middle school kids? There are so many, and in fact, middle grade books and young adult books, there are just so many out there. Go to the Atlas Book Club blog. That's the best I can say right now off the top of my head. On the blog, we feature many diverse books for all ages, and we have a lot of recommendations for middle grade and for young adults, which is like 12 and above, 14 and above. So go on there. I know we have lists for Latinx culture. We have that. We have books that are set in different parts of Asia, like India and the Philippines. I mean, we have such rich content on there. So I just say go on the blog and explore. And again, we'll put a list together and post for you guys.
And I think what we can be doing as we're going to do these monthly is we'll have book recommendations. We'll have sort of insights into what we've seen, both as as moms and as leaders in this area, and we'll bring some books and we'll show you some books and we'll talk about how we've talked to our kids, because my kids read books about very tough issues sometimes, and we spend a good amount of time debriefing and talking about those. And so I would love to have those conversations during this of how do you talk to your kids about very difficult subjects. And particularly when it involves tragedies, diversity, and diversity issues, and amongst a whole bunch of things. And the one I'll highlight that we can talk about sometime is my son read a book. He's 8, and he just read a book about the Twin Towers, and we had a very complex and long discussion about the people who flew the planes into the World Trade Center, because he really wanted to dig deep into why they did it. And we had and his family he has a large portion of his family is Muslim, my son, our family. And so he really wanted to dig deep into, do Muslims believe this? And so we had a long conversation, and we can give tips and tools on those things too when you're encountering real world, if your kids like historical, books or biographies or things like that as well.
Yeah. And I do want to add actually that I wouldn't be a good businesswoman if I didn't. That Atlas Book Club has 4 age groups. So you have the picture books where you get these kind of books. So that's our youngest. And then we have early chapter reads, which is for ages 7 to 9. But then we have our 9 to 12, which is middle grade. So that's called our nest. And then we have 12 and above, which is our soar group. So if you're looking for, very rich in culture books, we feature that. I mean, there's so much, and I can talk about this another time because I don't want to take up too much time, but there's so much intention that goes into the books that we select. So for example, for this month, for the month of May, we're featuring Turkey and Iran. And the book that's set in Iran, so that's set in Turkey. Both are really good, but the book that's set in Turkey is so good. It's set in 1561. You know, it's this historic, and it just shows, you know, Persian culture and the history of the Persian Empire before, you know, Western boom, for lack of a better term, you know, and it's so rich. So that those books are out there, you know. Yes, it takes a little bit more effort to find them, but we've done the work for you. So
Yeah.
you know, but they're definitely out there. And actually, I find myself reading a lot of young adult books now, because it's just the way they've told the stories are just so captivating for that particular audience. So
Yeah.
let's see. We don't have any more questions, I don't think. Let's see. Nope, that's it. So we'll wrap up. Yeah?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And thank you for joining us. Like I said, we were hoping to do this live in Austin earlier this week. And, you know, that was not in the cards, but we're going to continue these conversations monthly. And we hope to do these, you know, workshops that we had planned all over the country at some point when things open up. But you know, I appreciate that you took any time to be part of this. I mean, this is the first step into committing to really bringing about that curiosity to your kids. And I always say I'm a mom first. That's where my heart and my passion is. And so when I can combine my work and my heart and passion for my kids, like I'm incredibly excited. And having you as a partner has been just so great. I love our calls, and I love everything about Atlas Book Club. And thanks everybody for joining, and look out for us on June 11th.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining. You can learn more about what Mindy does at fundamentaladvisory.com, and of course atlasbookclub.com. You can contact me at info@atlasbookclub.com. And Mindy, where can they reach you?
You can reach me at you can email me at Mindy MINDY at fundamentaladvisory.com.
Okay, awesome. Thank you everyone. Thanks for taking the time. We'll see you next month. Thanks.
See you next month.
Bye.
Bye.